Hi, this is Andrew. Thanks for joining me. This video covers adding a second domain controller to an existing domain. From here, we could add more domain controllers depending on our needs, but in this case, we're just going to use two domain controllers, and then we're going to look at some of what makes this situation ideal where you have multiple domain controllers. So, first thing, we have a domain that exists on the left side of the screen. This is our class.local domain. We have two computers in here. We have a member server, and previously we've installed certificate services on this. We also have just a computer on there, and that is a Windows 10 computer. So if we go into domain controllers, we only see this one domain controller. What we want to do now is take this server here. This is another Windows 2019 server, and we want to make it a second domain controller in our domain. Some of the steps are very much like joining the domain. First thing we're going to do is go into networking, and in order to find the domain, let's go this way. In order to find the domain, it needs DNS. So even though we're adding to an existing domain, it still needs to find the domain. So we'll go here. So first thing DNS related I want to do is point to the DC1 to get DNS. This allows this computer to find the domain. Otherwise, it won't be able to join a domain that it can't find. So I'm going to put 172.16. Oops. Let's try this again. 16.123.176. Now, while I'm here, I'm actually going to put an alternate DNS server. I'm going to have it point to itself. Now, I could have used the 172.16.123.18 address. I just figured out I'll use the local host address. So what happens here later on, I could actually swap these later on. I probably won't, but it means that if for some reason the primary DNS server, the 176 server, is not reachable, server's down, being rebooted, crashed, whatever, it'll look at the alternate. Now, since we're going to have DNS and Active Directory on this system, we could later on swap this to be the primary and leave the other one as the alternate. Really, it won't impact much, but I'm going to do that, and now I can close everything there. Now, if I were to open a command prompt, I should be able to ping class.local. This is just verifying that I can reach this domain, and I am getting a reply from 176. So I'm all set there. Next up, I need to actually start the installation, and this part is just like installing Active Directory on a new domain the first time we've installed it, which we did in an earlier lesson. Okay, so now I want to add roles and features. I can go to Manage, Add Roles and Features, or just select Add Roles and Features. Before you begin, that's all that stuff. I'm going to do role-based. I'm going to do it on this server. This is called Server 3. I'm not going to rename it. I could rename it DC2, but for our environment, the name is not that critical. In the real world, you'd want some consistent naming convention. So now I want to install Active Directory Domain Services. I check that off, and it'll say you also need to add these things, add features, and then I can move forward with that. I don't need to check anything else off. And in this environment, if I were to check off one of these, the installation might run into problems or go very slow. So now we're ready to install. I will click next and install. And this will go through the installing the files that are needed for Active Directory. So we'll take a break and come back as soon as it's ready. Okay, it took about 3 minutes or so, and just like last time when we installed it on the primary or the first domain controller, we have the option of promoting this server to a domain controller right here, or if I forget that, I can always click there and it'll give me the option. So if I close that, right here it says promote this server to a domain controller. Same thing. And now we have our deployment configuration wizard. And last time we did add a new forest. We created class.local. If I do this right now, I would have two separate class.local domains that would not work together and cause all kinds of problems. I can't. If the DNS servers are separate, they'll just be separate domains or that happen to have the same name. If they have crossing over DNS servers like they do in this system, it would cause a lot of problems because computer security identifiers wouldn't match, and it would get very confusing very quickly. Do not add a new forest that has the same name as an existing forest in the same place. That's just recipe for disaster. If you're creating a test environment, give it a different name. So you have class.local, make it test class.local or some other name, completely separate domain. Now, in our case, we don't want to do that. We want to add a domain controller to an existing domain. So first thing we're going to do, we could type in class.local, or I can look for other domains. So I'm going to do, when I do select, it needs credentials to actually look at the domain. So I'm going to do class administrator and my password. And now it's going to look at DNS and find all of the domains in my forest. This is because I changed the DNS server on this computer earlier. I see class.local, I can select it. I could have also typed it there. Because I just entered credentials, it puts them in down here because that's how I found the domain. If I needed to type them in, I would have just done that, and same thing. So I am on the class domain, the administrator account. It absolutely needs to be the administrator account on the domain you're trying to join. Add domain controller to an existing domain. If for some reason I were creating a multi-domain forest, I could add a new domain, and this could be east.class.local or something like that. Once again, we are only looking at adding a second domain controller to our existing domain. So, we do want to add DNS. We do want it to be a global catalog server. We do not want it to be a read-only domain controller. That is a separate thing that would allow us to only authenticate, but we couldn't create accounts on it and do things on it. We want a separate full domain controller. So we don't want read-only. So this is our directory service restore mode password, just something we need to make note of. DNS, and now it's saying, where do we want to get the domain configuration? And in a larger environment, we could specify which domain controller we wanted to get it from. If it's a domain controller that's more local, has a better connection, we might select that. If it's a domain controller that has lower load or lower anticipated load while this is happening, we could select that. In our case, there's not a lot of information. Basically, it's everything here is going to get copied over, and we're going to just say any domain controller because there's only one other one to use anyway. And then it's the same, where do we want to store these files? And review all the options, and it'll do a prerequisite check. And this tells us some information about the domain. Since nothing in here is red, there's nothing that's stopping us. It's telling us just general information. Best practice is not to have an IP address configured by DHCP. In our test environment, that's the way we have things done. So now that's done, we can click install. Now it's going to go through the whole process of installing. It's going to create a DNS server here. It's going to copy everything over from the domain controller. So when we come back, it will be ready to reboot. Okay, so it's about to reboot, and if I select close on that, and I can say it's rebooting on its own. While that's happening, I'm going to go over here, and I can go up to view, and so So over here on the first domain controller, I can go up to action and I can go up to refresh. And now we have another domain controller listed here. I could hit F5 to refresh it as well. So that is showing that we now have 2 domain controllers in this environment. We still have the 2 servers in the environment, but now we have 2 domain controllers. So let's connect to our second domain controller again. And as soon as we get it up and running, we'll be back. Okay, the system is now back up and running, and if I go to a command prompt and type "who am I am now logged in as class on the class domain as administrator. So that's what I expect. That's what I was hoping for. Now, as we saw, we have 2 domain controllers. So if I go into Windows Administrative Tools and Users and Computers, I now see my domain exists here as well. So I'll see the same thing. I have those 2 computers. I have those 2 domain controllers I saw here. And if I go into users, it'll have all the users that I've previously created. If I wanted to create a new OU, I could go here and let's do it here and say new, and I want an organizational unit, and we will call this unit, we'll do QC, and now I have a QC organizational unit. And in order for me to see it over here, I need to refresh things. Just like before, if I click on action and refresh, now when I click refresh, we should see the QC organizational unit come up. And if you notice there's a slight cut there, what actually happened is it was not replicating properly, so I had to kind of go in and force the issue. So I went to Sites and Services, and I went down to the default for site and servers and saw server 3, and I right-clicked and replicated configuration from the selected DC. So with that done, now we have the QC OU. And now let's see if it works if I create a new organizational unit. And this time, hopefully it's a lot smoother. We're going to do MFG for manufacturing. And now I have that here. If we go here and refresh, we're still having the replication issue. So I will replicate from the selected domain controller, and now when I do refresh here, refreshing, and I forgot to select up here. Let's try a third one and see if we can get the third one to work cleanly. So let's do new organizational unit again, and this one is going to be QA. And now I'll go back to here. Make sure I have the right level selected because I don't want to refresh everything in the QC. I want to refresh everything at this level. So a refresh here, and still our replication is not happening as quickly as I would like. So if I do that and then go back to this level, I can refresh, and now I have QA. So now let's see what happens within the organizational units. So I have QA right here, and if I refresh this, I can refresh this. I can get the names in the order I want. So I'm going to look at QA. I'm going to do a new user, and this is going to be Mary. And I have Mary here. Next. I need a okay, I have the Mary account, and if I go over here and refresh the QA OU, there's the Mary account. And the Mary account is there. And if I were to go over here, I could actually say, give a last name, and this is Mary Smith. And I'll put a telephone number here, 123 4567890, and I have applied those changes to Mary. And if I go back here and open up Mary's account, let's refresh. Now I have Mary Smith, 123456789. It does take a minute or two sometimes. So you generally don't want to be working on the same account at the same time. There are systems in place to figure out which thing to save when that happens. So now if I were to go to my client computer, I could, as long as I had DNS pointing to both of these systems, if one of them is down, I can still log in with the other one. And the idea is the failure of one system doesn't prevent your environment from working. One last thing, let's just confirm we can go this way. So if I create I'm going to create a group, and I'm going to call it, let's see, I believe I was in QC, so I'm going to call it QC share read write. So this is a security group that I'll be adding things to and using for different reasons. If I go to my QC organizational unit over here, nothing there, but that's because I have to refresh it. I have to tell it, give me the new list. And there it is. Just took a minute. So keep in mind, replication is not instant, and depending on where you have things, if they are separated enough, replication can take up to 15 minutes or more if you're at separate sites with slow connections across the sites. So you could create an account here and theoretically have it take a while to show up on the other side. But you can see replication happens in both ways, even if it's not always as quick as we'd like. And if you ever need to confirm it's working or make it happen faster, you can go to Sites and Services and go down to your first site and select the domain controller, replicate from this, or replicate my changes to this. That's a more complex item in Active Directory, not critical for what we're doing, but if you just recognize that things that happen here, even if it doesn't happen immediately, that is the idea of having multiple domain controllers so that one can fail and you can use the other one. That's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching.